There is something strangely comforting about looking at the moon late at night. It hangs there in the darkness, silent and distant, yet always familiar. No matter where you are in the world, the same pale light drifts across the sky, watching quietly as people fall asleep beneath it. For thousands of years, humans have looked up at that glowing circle and wondered what it really is, how it came to be there, and whether it hides more secrets than we have been told. Tonight, we are going to take a slow and gentle journey through those secrets. Not in a rush, not with loud theories or sharp conclusions, but in the calm, steady way that lets your mind wander while your body relaxes. The moon has always been surrounded by mystery, and the deeper you look, the stranger the story becomes. Before we drift too far into the darkness, take a moment to settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow down. If you enjoy these quiet late-night explorations, don't forget to subscribe to Sleepy Tinfoil Hat and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always like to imagine all of us scattered across the planet, under the same sky, listening together while the moon moves silently overhead. Now there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go, and nothing you need to solve. Just listen and let the story unfold at its own pace. The moon feels close when you look at it, but it is much farther away than most people realize. On average, it sits about 380,000 kilometers from Earth, far enough that even light takes more than a second to travel between the two. That distance is large enough to make the moon feel unreachable, yet small enough that it dominates our night sky more than anything else. It is the only place beyond Earth where humans have ever set foot, and even that happened more than half a century ago. Since then, the moon has remained mostly quiet again, as if it prefers to keep its secrets to itself. One of the strangest things about the moon is how perfectly it seems to fit in the sky. It appears almost exactly the same size as the sun when viewed from Earth, which is why we can see total solar eclipses, where the moon covers the sun so precisely that only a glowing ring of light remains. This balance is not something we see anywhere else in the solar system. It is a coincidence, at least according to scientists, caused by the moon being about 400 times smaller than the sun, but also about 400 times closer to us. Still, coincidences like that make people wonder if there is more to the story than simple chance. The official explanation for how the moon formed is called the giant impact theory. According to this idea, billions of years ago, when the solar system was still young and chaotic, a planet-sized object crashed into the early Earth. The collision was so violent that it threw enormous amounts of rock and debris into space, and over time that material gathered together, slowly forming the moon. It is a dramatic story, one filled with fire and motion and destruction, but also with the quiet idea that something stable can come from something violent. Even so, not everyone has been fully satisfied with this explanation. There are details about the moon that make scientists pause, small things that do not fit perfectly into the models. For example, the moon is unusually large compared to the planet it orbits. Most moons in the solar system are tiny compared to their planets, but ours is different. Earth and the moon almost feel like a pair, rather than a planet and a satellite. Some researchers have pointed out that without the moon, life on Earth might never have developed the way it did. The moon stabilizes the tilt of our planet, controls the tides, and helps keep the climate from changing too wildly. It is as if the moon is not just nearby, but necessary. Another strange detail is the way the moon always shows us the same face. No matter when you look at it, you never see the other side from Earth. This is because the moon rotates at exactly the same speed that it orbits our planet, a condition called tidal locking. Over long periods of time, gravity forced the moon into this position, like a dancer always turning the same side toward their partner. It is a natural process, but it feels almost deliberate when you think about it. Half of the moon stayed hidden from human eyes for most of history, and even today, it still feels like the far side belongs to a different world. When the first spacecraft finally traveled around the moon and photographed that hidden side, the images surprised many scientists. The far side looks very different from the side we see every night. The familiar face of the moon has large dark plains called maria, formed by ancient volcanic activity. The far side, however, is rougher, filled with craters, mountains, and uneven terrain. No one expected the difference to be so dramatic. It raised questions about how the moon formed, how it cooled, and why one side ended up so different from the other. For centuries, people believed the moon was a perfect, smooth sphere, a flawless object in the sky. That idea came from ancient philosophers who thought everything in the heavens must be pure and unchanging. But when telescopes were first pointed at the moon, the illusion disappeared. Suddenly people could see shadows, ridges, and enormous craters scattered across its surface. The moon was not perfect at all. It was scarred, weathered, and ancient, covered in marks left by impacts that happened billions of years ago. Instead of becoming less interesting, it became much more mysterious. Those craters tell a story that goes back to the early days of the solar system, when rocks and fragments were flying everywhere, crashing into planets and moons without warning. The moon has no atmosphere to protect it, so every impact stayed there, frozen in time. Earth has weather, oceans, and shifting land that erase old scars, but the moon keeps them all. In a way, the moon is like a memory of what space used to be like, a record of a time when everything was still forming and nothing was stable yet. Some scientists have even suggested that the moon may have formed faster than we once thought, possibly in a matter of weeks after that ancient collision. If that idea is true, then the moon did not slowly grow over millions of years, but instead appeared quickly, almost suddenly, in the sky of the young Earth. Imagine what that would have looked like. A new world rising above the horizon where nothing had been before. It is the kind of thought that makes the moon feel less like a distant object and more like part of Earth's own history. There is also the strange fact that the moon is moving away from us. Very slowly, year by year, it drifts farther from Earth, about 4 centimeters every year. That is not something you would ever notice in a lifetime, but over millions of years the change becomes enormous. Long ago, the moon would have looked much larger in the sky than it does now, and the tides would have been far stronger. One day, far in the future, the moon will be so distant that total eclipses will no longer happen at all. The perfect balance we see today will be gone. Because of details like these, the moon has always inspired more than just scientific curiosity. It has inspired stories, theories, and sometimes even conspiracies. Some people believe the moon is not entirely natural. Others think there are things on the moon we have not been told about. And while many of those ideas sound strange at first, they often come from real questions that never felt completely answered. The moon sits there every night, quiet and unchanged, and the human mind cannot help wondering if something so familiar could still be hiding something unknown. Even during the space race, when humans finally reached the moon, the feeling of mystery did not disappear. In some ways, it only grew stronger. The missions brought back rocks and photographs, but they also left behind stories, rumors, and unanswered questions that people still talk about today. When something becomes part of history, it also becomes part of imagination, and the moon has always lived in both places at once. If you think about it long enough, the moon starts to feel less like a simple object in the sky and more like a companion that has always been there, watching over Earth since the very beginning. It has seen every ocean form, every continent shift, every civilization rise and fall. Long before humans existed, the moon was already there, pulling the tides and lighting the nights. And long after we are gone, it will probably still be there, drifting slowly farther away, keeping its quiet distance. Tonight, we are only beginning the journey. There are many more strange details, forgotten stories, and unusual theories about the moon that we can explore together. Some come from science, some from history, and some from the strange place in between where curiosity never quite falls asleep. And as we keep moving forward, slowly and calmly, the moon will stay above us, silent as always, waiting for us to notice the things we usually overlook. The more you think about the moon, the more it begins to feel like something that was always meant to be there, even though science tells us it formed from chaos. Every night it rises and falls in a pattern so steady that ancient people used it as a clock long before mechanical time existed. Entire calendars were built around its phases. Farmers planted by it, sailors navigated by it, and storytellers filled the darkness with myths about it. The moon was never just another object in the sky. It was a guide, a signal, sometimes even a warning. And the strange thing is that even today, with satellites and computers and modern science, that feeling never completely went away. One of the reasons the moon feels so powerful is because it controls the tides. The oceans respond to its gravity in a slow, steady rhythm, rising and falling every day as the moon moves across the sky. It is easy to forget how enormous that force really is. Entire seas lift and settle because of the moon's pull. Billions of tons of water shift back and forth, twice every day, without fail. If the moon were not there, the tides would be much smaller, and life on Earth might have developed very differently. Some scientists believe that those early tides helped life move from the oceans onto land, creating the conditions that allowed complex creatures to exist at all. The idea that the moon helped make life possible leads to another strange thought. Without the moon, Earth might not be the planet we know. Our planet tilts as it spins, and that tilt gives us seasons. But that tilt is not perfectly stable on its own. Over long periods of time, it could wobble wildly, changing the climate in ways that would make life much harder to survive. The moon's gravity acts like a stabilizer, keeping Earth's tilt from shifting too much. It is as if the moon quietly holds the planet steady, making sure the environment stays calm enough for life to continue. When you start looking at it that way, the moon stops feeling like a random object that just happened to form nearby. It begins to feel like something that fits a little too perfectly. Not in a magical way, and not in a way that proves any conspiracy, but in a way that makes the mind pause. Out of all the possible ways a planet could form, Earth ended up with a moon that is exactly the right size, exactly the right distance, and exactly the right influence to make life easier to exist. It is one of those coincidences that feels almost too precise. There are other small details that make the moon unusual. For example, its orbit around Earth is almost perfectly circular compared to many other moons in the solar system. Some moons travel in stretched, uneven paths, moving closer and farther from their planets in dramatic ways. Our moon moves in a calmer pattern, changing distance slightly, but never wildly. That steady orbit helps keep the tides predictable, and the motion of the sky familiar. Ancient people noticed that regularity long before they understood gravity, and they trusted it because it never seemed to fail. The surface of the moon also holds clues that scientists are still trying to understand. When astronauts first walked there, they found a landscape covered in fine grey dust, almost like powder. That dust had been created by billions of years of impacts, tiny rocks striking the surface again and again, slowly grinding it down. Because there is no wind on the moon, nothing blows the dust away. It just stays there, layer after layer, untouched for millions of years. Every footprint left by the astronauts is still there today, exactly as it was when they stepped away. That idea alone feels strange when you think about it slowly. On Earth, nothing stays the same for long. Wind erases footprints, rain washes away tracks. Plants grow, decay, and grow again. But on the moon, time moves differently. Without air or water, the surface barely changes. A mark made today could still be there thousands of years from now. It is almost like the moon exists outside the normal flow of time, holding on to everything that happens to it. When the Apollo missions brought back moon rocks, scientists expected them to look very different from rocks on Earth. And in some ways they did, but in other ways they were surprisingly familiar. Many of the minerals found in lunar samples were similar to ones on Earth, which supported the idea that the moon formed from material that once belonged to our planet. Still, there were differences that raised questions. Some of the rocks showed signs of forming in conditions that did not match the simplest versions of the giant impact theory. It did not mean the theory was wrong, but it meant the story was more complicated than anyone first thought. Another mystery is the moon's core. Compared to Earth, the moon's core is very small. Earth has a large active core made mostly of iron, which creates our magnetic field and keeps the planet geologically alive. The moon, on the other hand, seems mostly quiet inside. Its core is tiny, and its magnetic field is weak. That difference makes the moon feel almost unfinished, as if it never fully developed the way planets usually do. Some scientists believe the ancient collision that formed the moon could have stripped away much of the material that would have formed a larger core, leaving the moon lighter and less active. Even the way the moon reflects sunlight has its own strange qualities. It looks bright in the night sky, but the surface is actually quite dark, similar in color to worn asphalt. The reason it seems so bright is because the sky around it is black, making the reflected light stand out more. When astronauts stood on the moon, the sunlight was harsh and sharp, with no atmosphere to soften it. Shadows were deep and black, and the sky stayed completely dark even in the middle of the lunar day. It must have felt like standing in a place that was both bright and empty at the same time. People who study the moon often describe it as a record of the past, a place where the early history of the solar system is still visible. While Earth keeps changing, the moon keeps remembering. Every crater, every ridge, every layer of dust is a piece of history that never faded. In a way, the moon is like an archive floating in space, holding on to events that happened billions of years ago. When scientists look at it, they are not just looking at a neighbor, they are looking at a memory. Because of that, the moon has always attracted curiosity beyond science. Throughout history, people imagined that the moon might be hollow, or that something could be hidden beneath its surface. Some of those ideas came from misunderstandings, and some came from the simple feeling that something so strange could not be completely ordinary. Even today, there are theories that the moon is not exactly what it seems. Most of them have no evidence, but they exist because the moon feels mysterious in a way that is hard to explain. Part of that mystery comes from how familiar the moon is. We see it so often that we forget how unusual it really is. We forget that it is a world, a real place, floating in space just beyond reach. We forget that humans have only visited it a handful of times, and that most of its surface has never been explored up close. It sits there every night, close enough to see with your eyes, but far enough that it still feels unknown. And the deeper we go into its story, the more it becomes clear that the moon is not just a simple satellite. It is part of Earth's history, part of our environment, and maybe even part of the reason we are here at all. That alone makes it worth looking at more closely, slowly, piece by piece, the way we are doing now. There are still many strange details left to explore, including the unusual signals recorded during early space missions, the strange shapes seen in old photographs, and the quiet stories that started during the time when humans first tried to reach the moon. And as we keep drifting forward, the moon stays above us, silent and steady, as if it has all the time in the universe to let us figure it out. When humans finally decided to travel to the moon, it was not just a scientific mission. It was also a moment filled with tension, competition, and uncertainty. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union pushed technology forward faster than ever before, but it also meant that many things were done quickly, sometimes without fully understanding what might happen. The moon, which had always seemed calm and distant, suddenly became a destination. Rockets were built, astronauts were trained, and for the first time in history, people prepared to leave Earth and step onto another world. Before the famous landings ever happened, there were many unmanned missions sent toward the moon. Some of them failed, some of them disappeared, and some returned data that raised more questions than answers. Early probes showed that the lunar surface was much rougher than expected. There were craters everywhere, sharp rocks, deep shadows, and strange patterns that did not always match the predictions scientists had made from Earth. At the time, there was even concern that the surface might be covered in such thick dust that a spacecraft could sink into it. No one could be completely sure until they tried. When the first successful spacecraft orbited the moon and sent back clear photographs, people were amazed. The images showed a world that looked ancient and untouched, a place where nothing moved and nothing changed. But along with the excitement came a quiet feeling of unease. The moon looked empty, yet not simple. The craters overlapped in ways that told stories of impacts happening again and again over billions of years. Some of the formations looked almost too perfect, as if shaped by forces that were not immediately obvious. By the time the Apollo missions were ready, engineers had solved many of the technical problems, but there was still a sense that the moon might hold surprises. The astronauts trained for every situation they could imagine, but they were also aware that they were going somewhere no human had ever been before. The distance alone made the mission feel unreal. Once the spacecraft left Earth, there would be no quick return, no easy rescue. Everything depended on careful planning and a little bit of luck. When Apollo 8 became the first mission to carry humans around the moon, the astronauts described the experience as both beautiful and unsettling. As they moved behind the moon, they lost radio contact with Earth for the first time. For several minutes, they were completely alone, cut off from the planet, surrounded by silence. They could see the far side of the moon passing beneath them, a landscape no one on Earth had ever seen directly. It was rough, heavily cratered, and very different from the familiar face we see at night. That moment of silence behind the moon became one of the most remembered parts of the mission. Not because anything went wrong, but because of how it felt. The astronauts later said that being out of contact with Earth made them realize just how far they had traveled. The moon no longer looked like a bright circle in the sky. It looked like a real place, cold and empty, with no sign of life anywhere. For the first time, the distance between Earth and the moon felt real. When Apollo 11 finally landed on the lunar surface, the world watched together. Millions of people stayed awake late into the night, waiting to see the first human step onto another world. The moment itself was calm, almost quiet. Neil Armstrong climbed down the ladder, stepped onto the dust, and spoke words that would be repeated for decades. But behind that simple moment was a mission full of unknowns. No one could be completely sure what the surface would feel like, how the dust would behave, or what unexpected problems might appear. The astronauts described the moon as both beautiful and strange. The ground was soft but firm enough to walk on. The horizon seemed closer than it should, because the moon is smaller than Earth. The sky was black even in daylight, with no air to scatter the sunlight. Every sound came only through their suits, and every movement felt slow because of the lower gravity. It was like being in a place that followed different rules, even though it was right next door to our planet. One detail that surprised the astronauts was how quiet everything felt. On Earth, there is always some kind of background noise, wind, insects, distant sounds that remind you the world is alive. On the moon, there was nothing. No air, no movement, no sound at all except what traveled through their equipment. Even when they jumped or dropped tools, there was no echo. The silence was complete, and it made the moon feel less like a place and more like an empty stage. During the Apollo missions, instruments were placed on the moon to measure things like temperature, radiation, and moonquakes. Yes, the moon actually has its own kind of earthquakes, although they are usually weaker and happen for different reasons. Some are caused by the moon cooling and shrinking slowly over time. Others are caused by the gravitational pull of Earth stretching the moon slightly as it orbits. When scientists studied the data, they found something unexpected. Some of the moonquakes seem to last much longer than earthquakes on Earth, almost as if the moon vibrated like a bell after being struck. That description became famous among researchers. When certain impacts were recorded, the moon did not just shake briefly, it rang. The vibrations traveled through the interior and continued for a long time before fading. This did not mean the moon was hollow, but the way it carried those vibrations suggested that its internal structure was different from Earth's. The idea that the moon could ring like a bell sounded strange enough that it started appearing in books, documentaries, and sometimes even in conspiracy theories. People began wondering what the inside of the moon was really like. Another interesting discovery came from mirrors left on the lunar surface by the astronauts. These mirrors allow scientists on Earth to bounce laser beams off the moon and measure the distance very precisely. Even today, researchers still use those reflectors to track the moon's movement. The measurements confirmed that the moon is slowly drifting away from Earth, just a few centimeters each year. It is a tiny change, but over millions of years it adds up, reminding us that the Earth-Moon system is not fixed. It is still evolving, even now. The Apollo missions continued for several years, with astronauts exploring different areas of the moon, collecting rocks and setting up more instruments. Each mission added new information, but also new questions. Some regions looked older than others. Some rocks seemed to come from deep beneath the surface. Some craters showed signs of events that scientists were still trying to understand. The more the moon was studied, the less simple it seemed. Then, after Apollo 17, the mission stopped. Humans had gone to the moon several times, walked on its surface, driven across its plains, and brought back samples. And then, suddenly, it ended. No more landings, no more astronauts, no permanent bases, nothing. The moon went back to being distant again, just a bright circle in the sky. For many people, that sudden silence felt strange. After all the effort it took to get there, why did we stop going? There are practical reasons, of course. The missions were expensive, and the political pressure that drove the space race faded. But the feeling remained that the story of the moon was not finished. We had only visited a few small areas on one side of it. Most of the surface had never been explored by humans, and the far side remained even more mysterious than before. As time passed, the moon became quiet again, almost as if it was waiting for new missions, new questions, new reasons for people to look up at it and wonder what might still be hidden there. And as we keep drifting deeper into the story, we begin to reach the part where science, mystery, and imagination start to overlap a little more than usual. Because the moon has not only been studied by scientists, it has also been surrounded by strange reports, unusual observations, and stories that never fully disappeared. And those stories begin to appear more often the closer humans get to the surface of the moon. Long before astronauts ever walked on the moon, people were already reporting strange things about it. Some of these stories came from early astronomers who spent long nights looking through telescopes, watching the surface in careful detail. When you observe the moon often enough, you start to notice small changes. Shadows move as the sun rises and sets across the lunar landscape. Bright spots appear and disappear, and sometimes, very rarely, something looks different from one night to the next. Most of the time, these changes have simple explanations, but not always. Over the years, a number of observations were recorded that did not fit easily into the usual patterns. These reports became known as transient lunar phenomena, a name that sounds complicated, but simply means short-lived events on the moon. Astronomers described flashes of light, glowing areas, strange colors, and even what looked like clouds or mist rising from the surface. Because the moon has no atmosphere, clouds should not exist there, which made these sightings difficult to explain. Some scientists believed the flashes might be caused by small meteors hitting the surface, creating brief bursts of light. Others thought gases trapped underground might sometimes escape, glowing for a moment in the sunlight before fading again. The interesting thing is that these reports did not come from just one person or one time period. They appeared again and again over hundreds of years. In the 1700s, observers wrote about bright spots that seemed to flicker. In the 1800s, astronomers described reddish glows in certain craters. Even in the 1900s, long after telescopes became more advanced, people still reported seeing lights that did not behave the way they expected. None of this proved anything unusual was happening, but it kept the feeling alive that the moon was not completely silent after all. One of the most famous places connected to these sightings is a crater called Aristarchus. It is one of the brightest spots on the moon, easy to see even with a small telescope, and it has been linked to more reports of strange lights than almost anywhere else. Observers sometimes described flashes, faint glows, or temporary shadows that seemed to move across the crater floor. Scientists have suggested that Aristarchus might be an area where gases occasionally escape from beneath the surface, causing brief changes in brightness. That explanation makes sense, but the fact that the same location keeps appearing in reports makes it feel a little more mysterious than usual. When the space age began, researchers became even more interested in these strange observations. If lights really did appear on the moon, spacecraft might be able to detect them more clearly than telescopes on Earth. During the years leading up to the Apollo missions, scientists kept careful records of any unusual sightings, hoping to understand what was happening before sending astronauts there. Some of the reports turned out to be simple reflections of sunlight or errors in observation, but not all of them were easy to dismiss. There were also moments during early space missions when instruments picked up readings that scientists did not expect. Sometimes radiation levels changed suddenly. Sometimes cameras captured images that looked different from what the models predicted. Most of these things were eventually explained, but in the moment, they added to the feeling that the moon was not as predictable as it seemed from a distance. Space travel has a way of doing that. When you finally get close to something, it often becomes more complicated instead of less. Another strange detail about the moon is how extreme the environment really is. During the lunar day, the surface can become incredibly hot, hotter than boiling water in some places. During the night, the temperature drops far below freezing, colder than almost anywhere on Earth. Without an atmosphere to hold heat, the moon swings between these extremes every time it rotates. That constant change slowly cracks the rocks and creates the fine dust that covers the ground. It is a harsh place, silent and exposed, where even small forces can leave marks that last for millions of years. Because the moon has no air, no weather, and no life, it feels like a world frozen in time. But at the same time, it is not completely inactive. Small impacts still happen. Tiny meteors strike the surface, sometimes creating flashes that can be seen from Earth with the right equipment. The moon also experiences slight shifts caused by gravity, enough to create those long-lasting moonquakes that scientists recorded during the Apollo missions. These quiet movements remind us that the moon is not dead, only slower and calmer than Earth. During the years after the last Apollo mission, interest in the moon became quieter for a while. Space agencies focused on other goals, building space stations, sending probes to distant planets, and studying the sun. The moon remained close, but it was no longer the center of attention. Even so, researchers kept studying the data collected during those early missions, and every once in a while, something new would appear that made people look back at the moon again. One of the things that kept curiosity alive was the fact that humans had only explored a tiny part of the lunar surface. The astronauts landed in a few carefully chosen areas, all on the near side, where communication with Earth was easy. The far side remained mostly untouched, visited only by orbiting spacecraft and robotic probes. That meant half of the moon was still largely unknown, at least up close. When you realize how little of it has been explored, it becomes easier to understand why the moon still feels mysterious. There were also old photographs from the early missions that people continued to study for years afterward. Most of them showed exactly what scientists expected: rocks, craters, shadows, and dust. But sometimes people thought they saw shapes that looked unusual, lines that seemed too straight, or patterns that reminded them of structures. In almost every case, the explanations were simple. The human brain is very good at finding familiar shapes, even when they are not really there. Still, those images helped keep the imagination active, especially for people who already believed the moon might hold hidden secrets. The idea that something unknown could exist on the moon has appeared in stories for a long time. Writers imagined hidden bases, ancient ruins, or strange objects left behind by visitors from somewhere else. These stories were never meant to be taken as fact, but they show how powerful the moon feels in the human mind. When you look at it, it seems close enough to know, yet far enough to hide anything. That combination makes it the perfect place for mystery. Even scientists sometimes admit that the moon still has questions we have not answered. We are still learning about its interior, its history, and the exact way it formed. New missions are being planned, and new instruments are being built, because there is still more to discover. The moon may be the closest world to Earth, but that does not mean we understand it completely. As we keep moving forward in this slow journey, the story of the moon becomes less about a simple rock in space, and more about a place that has been part of human imagination for as long as people have looked at the night sky. A place that feels familiar, yet never fully explained. And the closer we look, the more it seems that the moon has always been quietly keeping its distance, revealing just enough to keep us curious, but never quite enough to make the mystery disappear. One of the things that makes the moon feel so mysterious is how long humans have been watching it. Long before telescopes, before science, before written history, people looked up at the same pale circle we see today and tried to understand what it was. They did not know about gravity or planets or orbits, but they could see that the moon followed a pattern. It grew and shrank, disappeared and returned, always in the same slow rhythm. That rhythm became part of life itself. Time was measured by it, stories were built around it, and in many cultures the moon was seen as something alive, something watching, something connected to Earth in ways people could feel but not explain. Ancient civilizations paid very close attention to the moon. The phases were used to mark months, to decide when to plant crops, when to travel, and when to hold ceremonies. In some places, the full moon was believed to make people restless or emotional. In others, it was thought to bring clarity or strange dreams. Even today, you can still hear people say that the full moon feels different, even if they cannot say why. Science does not support the idea that the moon changes human behavior in a direct way, but the feeling itself has never completely gone away. Part of that feeling may come from the way the moon affects the Earth physically, even if we do not notice it in everyday life. The tides move because of the moon, the planet's rotation stays steady because of the moon, and even the length of the day changes slowly over time because of the gravitational connection between Earth and its satellite. These are not small effects. They are forces acting on the entire planet, all the time, quietly, constantly, without ever stopping. When you realize that, it becomes easier to understand why people in the past felt that the moon must be more than just a distant rock. In ancient myths, the moon was often treated as a partner to the sun. The sun ruled the day, the moon ruled the night, and together they kept the world in balance. Some cultures imagined the moon as a god, others as a guardian, others as a traveler crossing the sky. In many stories, the moon was connected to cycles, to change, to the idea that nothing stays the same forever. Even though these stories were not scientific, they show how deeply the moon has always been part of human thought. When telescopes were invented, people expected the moon to become less mysterious. Instead, it became more complicated. Through the lens, the smooth glowing circle turned into a world full of detail. Mountains cast long shadows across the surface. Craters overlapped each other in patterns that told of ancient impacts. Dark plains stretched across huge distances, looking almost like dried seas. Astronomers began to map the moon carefully, giving names to its features, studying the way the sunlight moved across the surface as the days passed. Those dark plains were called Maria, which means seas in Latin, because early observers thought they might really be oceans. Later, scientists realized they were not water at all, but solid rock formed by volcanic activity long ago. The moon had once been much more active than it is now, with molten material rising from inside and spreading across the surface. Over time, that activity stopped, leaving the Maria as flat, dark regions surrounded by older, rougher terrain. Even today, you can see those shapes with the naked eye, patterns that people have looked at for thousands of years and turned into stories about faces, animals, and strange figures in the sky. The idea that the moon once had volcanoes surprised many early scientists. It meant the moon was not just a cold, lifeless object. It had a past, a time when it changed and moved and reshaped itself. That idea opened the door to many new questions. If the moon had been active before, what else might have happened there? How much of its history was still hidden beneath the surface? And how much could we really know just by looking from far away? Even with modern technology, the moon still keeps some of its history hidden. We can see the surface clearly, but we cannot easily see deep inside. Instruments have given us clues about the interior, suggesting layers of rock, a small core, and regions that cooled at different times. But the exact details are still being studied. Every new mission adds more information, yet also shows how much we still do not understand completely. Another reason the moon feels unusual is how different it is from Earth, even though it is so close. On Earth, everything changes. Weather moves across the sky. Water flows across the land. Plants grow, animals move, and the surface is always shifting. On the moon, nothing moves unless something hits it. A crater made millions of years ago can still look fresh. A footprint made by an astronaut can stay exactly the same for longer than human civilization has existed. It is a place where time seems to pass more slowly, where the past never quite disappears. Astronauts who visited the moon often talked about that feeling. They said the landscape looked ancient, as if it had been there forever. There were no signs of life, no sound, no air, no movement, just rock, dust, and sunlight. Some described it as peaceful, others described it as unsettling. Being somewhere so quiet, so empty, can make you realize how alive Earth really is. When you stand on the moon, the Earth becomes the bright object in the sky, glowing blue and white, full of motion and color. From that distance, our planet looks small, but also fragile. During the Apollo missions, astronauts sometimes said that looking back at Earth was the most powerful part of the journey. The moon was interesting, but Earth was home. Seeing it from far away, made them realize how thin the atmosphere is, how small the planet looks against the darkness of space. That perspective changed the way many people thought about our world. It reminded them that Earth and the Moon are connected, part of the same story, moving together through space. Even today, that connection continues. The Moon still pulls the tides, still circles the planet, still rises and sets every night, just as it did thousands of years ago. We have learned a lot about it, but it has never become completely ordinary. It still feels like something that belongs to both science and imagination at the same time. And the more we learn, the more we realize that the Moon's story is not finished yet. New missions are being planned, new instruments are being built, and people are once again preparing to travel there. After decades of quiet, the Moon is slowly becoming the focus of attention again. Not because we expect it to change, but because we know there are still things waiting to be discovered. As we continue drifting deeper into these quiet Moon secrets, the story begins to move into the time after the Apollo missions, when the world stopped visiting the Moon, but never stopped wondering about it. Because sometimes, the strangest part of the story is not what we found there, but why we left, and why it took so long to go back. After the last Apollo mission lifted off from the Moon in 1972, something unusual happened. For the first time in years, the world stopped going there. The rockets were still being built, the technology was still improving, and the knowledge gained from the earlier missions could have been used to continue exploring. Yet the landings ended, and the Moon returned to being a distant object in the sky again. At the time, the official reasons made sense. The missions were expensive, the political race that had driven them was over, and attention shifted to other goals like space stations and robotic probes. But for many people, the sudden quiet felt strange. It is easy to forget how quickly the Apollo program happened. In less than 10 years, humans went from barely leaving Earth's atmosphere to walking on another world. Then, almost just as quickly, the missions stopped. No permanent bases were built. No long-term stations were left behind. No return missions followed for decades. For something as important as reaching the Moon, the ending felt almost too abrupt, as if the story had paused instead of finishing. During the years that followed, space agencies did continue to study the Moon, but mostly from a distance. Satellites orbited it, mapping the surface in greater detail than ever before. Robotic probes landed in a few places, sending back measurements and images. These missions were useful, but they did not feel the same as having humans there. The Moon became quieter again, and the sense of mystery slowly returned. When people stop visiting a place, imagination tends to fill the space that science leaves behind. One of the reasons the Moon remained interesting was because of how little of it had actually been explored. The Apollo astronauts landed in only a handful of locations, all chosen carefully because they were relatively safe. Large parts of the Moon were never visited at all. The far side, the polar regions, and many of the rougher areas remained mostly unknown up close. Even with modern maps, there are still places no human has ever seen directly from the surface. The far side of the Moon is especially interesting. Because the Moon is tidally locked, that side always faces away from Earth. For most of human history, no one had ever seen it. When the first spacecraft sent back images, scientists were surprised by how different it looked. There were fewer dark plains and many more craters, making the surface rougher and more uneven. The reason for this difference is still studied today. Some theories suggest that the near side and far side cooled differently when the Moon was young, creating the uneven appearance we see now. Because the far side is hidden from Earth, it has always inspired more imagination than the side we see every night. People tend to wonder about places they cannot easily observe. Stories about hidden structures, unknown signals, or strange objects often focus on the far side, simply because it feels more mysterious. In reality, most of what we know about that region comes from orbiting spacecraft, and the images show a landscape that looks natural, ancient, and very quiet. Still, the idea of a half of the moon that stayed unseen for thousands of years gives it a certain feeling that is hard to ignore. In the decades after Apollo, scientists also began to study the moon's gravity in more detail. They discovered that the moon's gravitational field is not perfectly even. There are areas where the pull is slightly stronger, caused by dense regions beneath the surface. These areas are called mass concentrations, or mascons. They formed long ago when huge impacts filled craters with heavy volcanic rock. Spacecraft flying over these regions sometimes had to adjust their paths slightly because of the extra gravity. At first, these uneven gravity fields surprised researchers, but they also helped explain why the moon's surface looks the way it does. The large dark plains on the near side are connected to those dense regions, which means the history of impacts and volcanic activity shaped the moon in ways we are still learning about. The more carefully scientists measured the moon, the more they realized it was not as simple as it once seemed. Another discovery that brought new attention to the moon was the possibility of water. For a long time, scientists believed the moon was completely dry. Without an atmosphere, any water on the surface would quickly disappear into space. But later missions found hints that small amounts of ice might exist in places that never see sunlight, especially near the poles. In those deep craters, the sun never rises high enough to warm the ground, leaving some areas in permanent shadow. These cold regions became very interesting because frozen water could be useful for future missions. Water can be turned into drinking supplies, oxygen, or even rocket fuel. The idea that the moon might hold resources made people start thinking about returning, not just to visit, but to stay longer. Plans began to appear again, slowly at first, for new missions, new landings, and maybe one day, a permanent human presence. As these plans developed, old questions started to come back as well. People remembered the strange observations from earlier missions, the unusual readings, the reports of lights, the unexpected results from experiments. None of these things proved anything mysterious was happening, but they reminded everyone that the moon still had secrets left. It had never been explored as much as people sometimes assume. There is also something about the moon that makes it feel different from other places in space. Mars is farther away, the outer planets are more exotic, and distant galaxies are more mysterious in a scientific way. But the moon is close enough to see every night, and that closeness makes the unknown parts feel more personal. It is not just another world, it is our world's companion, always there, always visible, always just out of reach. Astronauts who went there often said that the moon felt familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The ground looked like rock, the horizon looked like a landscape, but everything behaved differently. The gravity was weaker, the sky was black, the silence was complete. It was a place that looked simple, but felt strange, like a version of Earth where something important was missing. That feeling may be part of why the moon has never stopped capturing attention. Even when science explains most of its features, there is still a sense that it holds more history than we have uncovered. Not in a dramatic or frightening way, but in the quiet way that old places often do. The moon has been there since before life began on Earth. It has watched every change the planet has gone through, without ever changing very much itself. And now, after many years of waiting, humans are preparing to return again. New missions are being planned, new spacecraft are being built, and the moon is once more becoming a destination, instead of just a light in the sky. This time, the goal is not only to visit, but to stay longer, to explore more places, and to learn what we missed before. As we continue drifting deeper into these moon secrets, the story moves toward those strange observations that appeared during the space age, the ones that made people wonder if the moon might be more active, or more complicated than it first seemed. Because sometimes the most interesting mysteries are not the ones from ancient times, but the ones recorded by modern instruments when we thought we already understood what we were looking at. As technology improved after the Apollo missions, scientists began looking back at old data with new tools. Sometimes when information is collected during an experiment, it does not seem unusual at first. But years later, when better computers and better models become available, small details start to stand out. This happened more than once with the records from early lunar missions. Measurements that once looked normal began to raise questions. Not because they proved anything mysterious, but because they showed that the moon was more complicated than anyone expected. One of the most talked about examples involved the seismic experiments left on the moon by the Apollo astronauts. These instruments were designed to detect vibrations in the lunar surface, similar to how seismographs on Earth detect earthquakes. The goal was simple. Scientists wanted to learn what the inside of the moon was like by studying how waves traveled through it. When rocks or small meteors struck the surface, the instruments would record the motion, and from that motion, researchers could estimate the structure below. The surprising part came when the data showed that some impacts caused vibrations that lasted far longer than expected. On Earth, the ground usually settles quickly after a quake because the planet's interior absorbs the energy. The moon behaved differently. When it was hit, the vibrations sometimes continued for a very long time, slowly fading instead of stopping quickly. Some scientists described the effect by saying the moon rang like a bell after being struck. The phrase sounded dramatic, but it was simply a way to describe how the vibrations traveled through the lunar interior. This did not mean the moon was hollow, even though that idea became popular in books and documentaries later. Most researchers believe the effect happens because the moon is very dry and solid compared to Earth. Without water and without active geology, the interior does not absorb energy the same way. Vibrations can travel farther and last longer before fading. Still, the discovery reminded everyone that the moon was not just a smaller version of Earth. It had its own structure, its own history, and its own behavior. Another curious set of observations came from orbiting spacecraft that photographed the lunar surface in extreme detail. These images showed the craters and plains more clearly than ever before, but they also revealed patterns that sometimes looked unusual at first glance. Straight lines, sharp angles, and shadows that seemed almost too perfect appeared in certain pictures. In most cases, these shapes turned out to be natural formations seen from unusual angles. When light falls across a rough surface, the human brain can easily imagine familiar shapes that are not really there. Even so, these photographs kept people interested, especially those who already believed the moon might hold hidden structures or unknown objects. The idea of something artificial on the moon became a popular theme in books, movies, and late-night discussions. Scientists generally explained these images as tricks of light and shadow, but the fact that they existed at all kept the imagination active. When a place is only partly explored, it is easy for stories to grow in the empty spaces. There were also moments during space missions when astronauts themselves described things that sounded unusual, even if the explanations later turned out to be simple. Space travel is a strange experience. When you are far from Earth, seeing unfamiliar landscapes, even ordinary events can feel unexpected. Reflections in the window, sunlight hitting the surface at sharp angles, or equipment behaving slightly differently can all seem mysterious in the moment. Over time, most of these stories were understood, but they still became part of the larger history of how humans first explored the moon. One reason the moon can look strange from orbit is the way sunlight falls on its surface. Without an atmosphere to soften the light, shadows are very sharp, and bright areas can look extremely bright, while dark areas look completely black. This high contrast can make the landscape appear more dramatic than it really is. A small ridge can cast a long shadow, and a shallow crater can look much deeper than it is. When photographs are taken from certain angles, the shapes can seem almost artificial, even though they are completely natural. Scientists who study these images learn to look carefully at the direction of the light, the angle of the camera, and the surrounding terrain before deciding what they are seeing. But for people outside the scientific community, those details are easy to miss. A picture that looks unusual at first glance can quickly turn into a mystery story, especially when the moon already feels like a place full of secrets. Another interesting detail about the moon is that it is still being hit by small meteors even today. Because there is no atmosphere to burn them up, tiny rocks from space can strike the surface at high speed. When this happens, it sometimes creates a brief flash of light that can be seen from Earth with the right equipment. Astronomers have recorded these flashes many times, confirming that the moon is not completely inactive. Even though it looks calm, small impacts are happening all the time. These impacts also remind scientists why the moon's surface looks the way it does. Every crater is the result of something striking the moon long ago. Some of the largest craters formed during the early days of the solar system, when collisions were much more common. Others are much newer, created by smaller impacts over millions of years. Without weather to erase them, the marks stay there, layer on top of layer, telling a story that goes back farther than anything we can see on Earth. In recent years, interest in the moon has started to grow again. New missions from different countries have returned to orbit, mapping the surface in even greater detail than before. Some spacecraft have landed near the poles, studying the cold, shadowed regions where ice may exist. Each mission adds new pieces to the puzzle, and each piece shows that the moon is still worth studying, even after all these years. The idea of building bases on the moon has also returned. Scientists and engineers talk about using the moon as a place to test technology for future missions to Mars and beyond. Because it is close to Earth, it is easier to reach than any other world. At the same time, it is far enough away to teach us how to live and work in space for long periods. If humans ever travel deeper into the solar system, the moon may become the first step. And with every new plan to return, the old stories come back as well. The strange lights, the unusual readings, the unexpected photographs, the feeling that the moon is familiar but not fully understood. None of these things prove anything mysterious, but together they create a sense that the moon still has more to tell us. As we continue this slow journey through its secrets, the story begins to move toward the present day, where new missions, new discoveries, and new questions are once again bringing the moon back into focus. Because even after thousands of years of watching it and decades of studying it, the moon still has a way of making us feel like we are only at the beginning of the story. In the last few years, the moon has slowly returned to the center of attention. After decades of being mostly quiet, space agencies around the world began planning new missions, new landings, and even the possibility of building permanent stations on the lunar surface. What makes this moment feel different from the past is that the goal is no longer just to visit the moon once and leave. This time, the idea is to stay longer, to explore more areas, and to learn things that earlier missions did not have the time or technology to discover. One of the biggest reasons for this renewed interest is the discovery that the moon may hold resources that could help future space travel. For many years, scientists believed the moon was completely dry, but later missions found strong evidence of ice trapped in deep craters near the poles. These craters never see sunlight, which means the temperature stays extremely low. In those permanent shadows, frozen water can remain for millions of years without evaporating into space. The idea that water exists on the moon changed the way people think about it. Water means oxygen, fuel, and the possibility of supporting human life for longer periods. The polar regions of the moon have become especially important because of this. Unlike the places where the Apollo missions landed, The poles experience long periods of light and darkness, depending on the season. Some mountain peaks near the poles receive sunlight almost all the time, while nearby craters remain in shadow forever. This unusual environment makes the poles a good place for future bases, since there could be both sunlight for energy and ice for supplies. It also means that some of the most interesting parts of the moon are places humans have never visited before. Modern spacecraft have been mapping these areas carefully, using radar and other instruments to study the surface without landing. The data shows that the moon is more complex than it first appeared. There are regions with unusual mineral compositions, areas where the ground reflects signals differently than expected, and places where the temperature stays colder than anywhere else in the solar system. Each discovery adds new questions, reminding scientists that even though the moon is close, it is not fully understood. Another reason the moon is becoming important again is because it could be used as a stepping stone for missions deeper into space. Launching rockets from Earth requires a lot of energy because of the planet's gravity. The moon's gravity is much weaker, which means spacecraft could take off from there more easily. Some engineers have suggested that future missions to Mars or beyond might begin from lunar bases, using the moon as a place to prepare before traveling farther. If that happens, the moon would become more than just a destination. It would become part of the path to the rest of the solar system. As plans for returning to the moon became more serious, scientists also began looking again at the old Apollo data with fresh interest. There were still experiments that had not been fully analyzed, measurements that could be studied with better computers, and photographs that could be examined in higher detail. Sometimes these old records confirmed what was already known, but sometimes they showed small details that had not seemed important before. When you look at something with new tools, you often notice things that were easy to miss the first time. One area that continues to interest researchers is the moon's interior. Even after decades of study, the exact structure inside the moon is still not completely certain. Seismic data suggests layers of rock, a small core, and regions that cooled at different speeds long ago. Some models show that the moon may have once been partially molten inside, with heat slowly escaping over billions of years. Other models suggest that the interior might still hold pockets of warmth, even though the surface looks completely frozen. These are not mysteries in the dramatic sense, but they show how much there is still to learn about a place that seems so familiar. Another subject that keeps coming up in discussions about the moon is the strange feeling astronauts described when they were there. Many of them said the experience was difficult to explain. The landscape looked simple, but being there felt different from being anywhere on Earth. The silence was deeper, the horizon felt closer, and the sky was always black. Without air, sound did not travel, and without weather, nothing moved. Some astronauts said the moon felt peaceful. Others said it felt lonely in a way they had never experienced before. That feeling may come from the fact that the moon is both close and far at the same time. It is the only world humans have visited beyond Earth, yet it is still mostly unexplored. When you look at it from the ground, it seems familiar, but when you stand on it, Earth becomes the distant object in the sky. That change in perspective can make the moon feel less like a place we own and more like a place we are only visiting. As new missions are planned, scientists are also being more careful about what they expect to find. The early space age was full of surprises, and even though technology is better now, there is still the understanding that exploring another world always brings something unexpected. Not because there are hidden secrets waiting to be uncovered in a dramatic way, but because nature often turns out to be more complicated than our first ideas. Robotic missions from different countries have already returned to the moon in recent years, landing in places that humans never visited before. Each landing has added new information about the surface, the soil, and the environment. Some probes have studied the far side, others have explored the poles, and some have tested new technology for future missions. These steps may seem small, but they are part of a larger plan that could lead to humans walking on the moon again. With every new mission, the old sense of curiosity returns. People begin to ask the same questions again. What else is there? What did we miss the first time? How much of the moon's history is still hidden beneath the dust and rock? These are the kinds of questions that never completely go away, especially when the place we are talking about hangs in the sky every night where everyone can see it. The moon has always been part of human imagination, but now it is becoming part of the future again as well. Not just as a symbol, but as a real destination that people may return to in the coming years. And whenever exploration begins again, the feeling of mystery always comes with it, even when the answers turn out to be simple. As we continue drifting through these quiet moon secrets, the story begins to move towards some of the stranger ideas people have had about the moon over the years. Ideas that came from unusual observations, misunderstood data, and the natural human habit of wondering if something so familiar could still be hiding something unknown. Because the moon has never only been a scientific object, it has always been a place where facts and imagination meet, especially in the long, quiet hours of the night. The moon has always been a place where imagination grows easily. Because it is so close, people feel like they should understand it completely. But because it is still far enough away to remain mostly untouched, it leaves room for questions. Over the years, those questions have sometimes turned into strange ideas, unusual theories, and stories that live somewhere between science and speculation. Most of them do not come from evidence of anything hidden. They come from the simple feeling that something so familiar could still hold mysteries we have not noticed yet. One of the most common ideas people have had about the moon is that it might not be entirely natural. This thought appeared long before the space age, when people first realized how unusual the Earth-Moon system really is. Compared to other planets, Earth has a very large moon. In fact, the moon is so big relative to Earth that the two bodies almost behave like a pair. They both orbit a point in space between them, rather than the moon simply circling Earth the way most moons circle their planets. Scientists understand why this happens, but the balance still feels unusual when you compare it to the rest of the solar system. The idea that the moon might have formed differently than expected led some people to imagine more extreme possibilities. One suggestion, sometimes mentioned in old books and discussions, was the idea of a hollow moon. This idea became popular after the Apollo seismic experiments showed that vibrations lasted longer than expected. The phrase, "ringing like a bell," sounded dramatic, and over time it was repeated in ways that made it seem more mysterious than it really was. Scientists explained that the effect could be caused by the moon's dry, rigid interior, but the image of a hollow world drifting through space stayed in people's minds. Another reason strange theories appeared is because the moon is one of the few places humans have visited, but not fully explored. When astronauts landed, they saw only small areas of the surface. The rest remained distant, seen only from orbit or through photographs. Whenever a place is partly known and partly unknown, imagination fills the gaps. Old photographs from the early missions were studied again and again, sometimes by scientists, sometimes by people simply curious about what might be hidden in the shadows. Some of these photographs showed patterns that looked unusual at first glance. Straight lines, shapes that seemed too regular, or shadows that formed angles that did not look natural. In most cases, the explanation was simple. The moon's surface is covered in sharp ridges, broken rock, and deep craters. When sunlight hits those shapes at low angles, it can create shadows that look artificial, even though they are completely natural. Our brains are very good at seeing familiar forms in random patterns, especially when we expect to find something interesting. The same thing happens when people look at the moon with the naked eye. Many cultures have stories about seeing a face, a rabbit, or other figures in the dark patches on the surface. Those shapes are not really there, but the human mind connects the patterns in ways that feel meaningful. This is not because people are imagining things on purpose. It is simply how the brain works, always searching for order, even in places where there may only be coincidence. There were also times during the space age when astronauts or mission controllers reported things that sounded unusual in the moment. Sometimes lights appeared in the distance. Sometimes instruments gave readings that were not expected, and sometimes equipment behaved in ways that were difficult to explain right away. Later, most of these events were understood as normal effects of space travel, reflections, radio interference, or simple technical problems. But when stories are told later, the ordinary explanations are not always remembered as clearly as the mystery itself. The moon's environment can make ordinary things seem strange. Without air, light behaves differently. Without sound, movement feels different. Without weather, every mark stays the same for a very long time. When astronauts described the surface, they often said it felt both real and unreal at the same time. The ground looked solid, but the horizon seemed closer. The sky was black even in daylight. Shadows were darker than anything on Earth. These details made the moon feel unfamiliar, even though it was made of the same kind of rock as our planet. Another reason the moon inspired unusual ideas is because it plays such an important role in Earth's history. It affects the tides, stabilizes the planet's tilt, and may even have helped create the conditions for life to develop. When something has that much influence, it feels like it must be important in ways we do not fully understand. Even though science explains the gravity behind these effects, the connection between Earth and the moon still feels special, almost like the two worlds are linked more closely than we usually think about. In modern times, most scientists focus on practical questions about the moon. How did it form? What is inside it? Where is the ice located? How can we build equipment that works in such a harsh environment? These questions may not sound mysterious, but they show that the moon is still a place full of things we are trying to figure out. Every mission adds new information, and every answer leads to new questions. At the same time, the older stories never completely disappear. People still talk about strange lights, unusual photographs, and unexplained observations. Not because there is proof of anything hidden, but because the moon invites that kind of thinking. It sits in the sky every night, quiet and unchanged, making it easy to imagine that something could be happening there without us noticing. In a way, the moon is the perfect place for mystery. It is close enough to feel familiar, but far enough to remain mostly unknown. We have walked on it, but only in a few places. We have mapped it, but not in every detail. We understand much about it, but not everything. That balance between knowledge and curiosity is what keeps the moon interesting, even after thousands of years of watching it. And as we continue this slow, quiet journey through its secrets, the story begins to move even deeper into the strange connection between the moon and Earth itself. Because the more scientists study that connection, the more they realize how much the two worlds depend on each other. It turns out the moon is not just orbiting our planet. In many ways, it has been shaping it from the very beginning. The connection between Earth and the moon is stronger than most people realize. It is easy to think of the moon as something separate, a distant object that simply happens to orbit our planet. But in reality, the two worlds have been influencing each other since the very beginning. From the moment the moon formed, its gravity began shaping the way Earth moved, the way the oceans behaved, and even the way the planets slowly changed over time. Without the moon, Earth would still exist, but it might not look the way it does today. One of the most important effects the moon has on Earth is the stabilization of the planet's tilt. Earth does not spin perfectly upright. It leans slightly as it rotates, and that tilt is what creates the seasons. Over very long periods of time, the tilt could change, making the climate more extreme or less predictable. The moon's gravity acts like a steadying force, keeping that tilt from shifting too much. Because of this, the seasons remain relatively stable, which helps life survive. It is one of those quiet influences that happens constantly, without anyone noticing, yet it affects the entire planet. The tides are another example of this connection. Every day, the oceans rise and fall because of the moon's pull. The water closest to the moon is pulled slightly toward it, creating a bulge in the ocean. On the opposite side of the planet, another bulge forms because of the way Earth and the moon move together through space. As the Earth spins, different parts of the planet pass through these bulges, creating the tides we see on the coasts. It happens over and over again, day after day, as it has for billions of years. These tides do more than move water back and forth. Over long periods, they actually slow down the rotation of Earth. The friction between the moving oceans and the solid ground takes a tiny amount of energy away from the planet's spin. The effect is extremely small, but it never stops. Millions of years ago, a day on Earth was shorter than it is now. The planet rotated faster, and the moon was closer. As time passed, the rotation slowed slightly, and the moon drifted farther away. Even today, the moon continues to move away from Earth by a few centimeters each year. This slow change means the Earth-Moon system is not fixed. It is still evolving, even after billions of years. In the distant past, the moon would have looked much larger in the sky. The tides would have been stronger, and the nights would have been brighter. In the distant future, the moon will appear smaller, and total eclipses will no longer happen because it will not be large enough to cover the sun completely. The balance we see now exists only during this particular moment in time. When scientists study this relationship, they often describe Earth and the moon as a pair rather than a planet and a satellite. Both objects orbit a shared center of gravity, located inside Earth but not exactly at its center. This makes their motion more like a slow dance than a simple circle. The moon pulls on Earth, and Earth pulls on the moon, each affecting the other in ways that never completely stop. It is a quiet movement, but it has been shaping the history of both worlds since they formed. Because the moon formed from material that once belonged to Earth, the two bodies share many similarities. Rocks brought back from the moon contain minerals that are also found on our planet. The differences that do exist help scientists understand how the collision that created the moon might have happened. According to the most accepted theory, a large object struck the young Earth, throwing material into space. That material gathered together, forming the moon while the rest fell back to the planet. The event would have been violent, but it also created the stable system we have today. Some researchers believe that without that collision, Earth might have developed very differently. The planet could have ended up with no moon at all, or with a much smaller one that would not have stabilized the tilt. In that case, the climate might have changed more dramatically over time, making it harder for life to survive. The idea that the moon helped create the conditions for life makes it feel less like an accident and more like a part of Earth's design, even though it formed through natural processes. There are also small details about the moon's orbit that scientists continue to study. For example, the orbit is slightly tilted compared to Earth's path around the sun. Because of this, eclipses do not happen every month. Even though the moon passes between Earth and the sun regularly, the alignment has to be just right. When it is, the moon can cover the sun almost perfectly, creating one of the most unusual sights in the sky. The fact that the moon and the sun appear the same size from Earth is a coincidence. But it is a coincidence that makes eclipses possible in a way that does not happen on most other planets. These kinds of details make the Earth-Moon system feel special, even though scientists can explain how it formed. Out of all the possible ways a planet could develop, this one ended up with a large moon at just the right distance to create stable seasons, strong tides, and rare but beautiful eclipses. It does not mean anything mysterious happened, but it shows how unusual our situation really is when compared to the rest of the solar system. As scientists continue to study the moon, they also look for clues about the early days of Earth. Because the moon has no weather and almost no geological activity, its surface preserves marks from ancient times that have long been erased here. By studying those marks, researchers can learn about the period when planets were still forming, when impacts were common, and when the solar system was much more chaotic than it is now. In this way, the moon acts like a record of the past, holding information that Earth can no longer show. The more we learn about the connection between Earth and the moon, the more it becomes clear that the two worlds cannot really be separated. The moon is not just something that orbits our planet. It is part of the same story, part of the same history, and part of the same system that has existed for billions of years. Every tide, every eclipse, every slow movement in the sky is a reminder of that link. And as we keep drifting deeper into these quiet secrets, the story begins to move toward the future. Because after centuries of watching the moon and decades of studying it, humans are now preparing to go back again. Not just to visit, but to explore more than ever before, and maybe to stay longer than we ever have. And whenever humans return to a place after a long time away, there is always the feeling that something new will be discovered, even if it turns out to be something simple. Because the moon has never stopped being there. It has only been waiting for us to look again. As plans to return to the moon become more real, the feeling surrounding it has started to change again. For many years, the moon felt like part of history, something humans had already done and moved on from. But now it is becoming part of the future. New spacecraft are being designed, new landing sites are being chosen, and scientists are preparing to study parts of the moon that no one has ever visited before. Even though the moon itself has not changed, the way we look at it is changing once more. One of the reasons the moon is important again is because it may become the first place where humans learn how to live somewhere other than Earth for long periods of time. During the Apollo missions, astronauts stayed only a few days at most. They landed, explored a small area, collected samples, and left. Future missions are planned differently. Instead of short visits, the goal is to stay longer, to build equipment that can survive the harsh environment, and to test how people can live and work in a place with no air, no weather, and much weaker gravity. Living on the moon would not be easy. The surface is covered in fine dust that sticks to everything. The temperature changes from extreme heat to extreme cold. Radiation from space reaches the ground without being blocked by an atmosphere. Even walking is different because the gravity is only about 1/6 of what we feel on Earth. Every movement takes practice, and every tool has to be designed carefully. But these challenges are exactly why scientists are interested. If humans can learn to live on the moon, they can learn to live almost anywhere. The polar regions are expected to play a big role in future missions. These areas are different from the places explored during Apollo. Near the poles, the sun stays low in the sky, creating long shadows and long periods of light. Some mountain peaks receive sunlight most of the time, which could provide energy for equipment. Nearby craters remain in darkness forever, keeping temperatures so cold that ice can stay frozen for millions of years. This combination makes the poles one of the most useful places on the moon for future exploration. Finding water on the moon was one of the discoveries that changed everything. For a long time, the moon was thought to be completely dry, but newer missions found strong evidence of ice hidden in shadowed regions. Even small amounts of water could make a big difference for future astronauts. Water can be used for drinking, for growing food, and even for making fuel. Instead of bringing everything from Earth, future missions might be able to use what is already there. This idea makes the moon feel less like a distant destination and more like a place where humans might actually stay. As new missions are prepared, scientists are also learning more about the moon's surface than ever before. Modern satellites can map the ground in incredible detail, showing small features that were impossible to see decades ago. They can measure temperature, study the composition of the soil, and even look beneath the surface using radar. These tools help researchers choose safe landing sites and understand what the environment will be like for future explorers. Even with all this technology, the moon still manages to feel quiet and mysterious. The more we study it, the more we realize how much of it remains untouched. Most of the surface has never been walked on. Many craters have never been seen up close. The far side, once completely hidden, is still mostly unexplored by humans. The moon may be the closest world to Earth, but in many ways, it is still unknown. Astronauts who visited the moon often talked about how different it felt compared to anything on Earth. The lack of sound was one of the things they remembered most. Without air, there is no wind, no echo, no background noise at all. Even when they moved, the only sounds came through their suits. The silence was so complete that it made the place feel almost unreal. Some astronauts said it was peaceful. Others said it felt lonely in a way they had never experienced before. Another thing they noticed was how the sky looked. On Earth, the sky is always blue during the day because the atmosphere scatters sunlight. On the moon, the sky stays black even when the sun is shining brightly. Stars can sometimes be seen at the same time as the sun, and the Earth appears as a bright, glowing sphere hanging above the horizon. Seeing Earth from the moon changes the way people think about our planet. It looks small, bright, and fragile against the darkness of space. That view of Earth has become one of the most powerful images from the space age. When astronauts saw our planet from the moon, they realized how thin the atmosphere really is, how small the continents look from far away, and how alone Earth appears in the vastness of space. Many of them said that moment changed the way they thought about everything. It made problems seem smaller and the planet itself seem more precious. As humans prepare to return to the moon, there is a feeling similar to the one people had during the early space missions. Excitement mixed with uncertainty, confidence mixed with curiosity. Even though we know much more now, we also understand that exploring another world always brings surprises. Nature often turns out to be more complicated than our first ideas, and the moon is no exception. There are still questions about its interior, its history, and the exact way it formed. There are still places no one has seen closely. There are still experiments waiting to be done. Each new mission will answer some questions, but it will also create new ones, just like before. That is the way exploration always works. The more we learn, the more we realize there is still to discover. The moon has been part of human life for as long as anyone can remember. It has been a clock, a guide, a symbol, and a mystery all at the same time. Now it is becoming something else as well. A place we may return to again and again, not just to visit, but to understand more deeply than ever before. And as we continue drifting through these quiet moon secrets, the story begins to move toward the final part of the journey, where everything comes together. The science, the history, the imagination, and the strange feeling that the moon has always been more than just a light in the sky. Because the longer you think about the moon, the more it feels like it has always been part of us, just as much as we have always been part of it. The longer people study the moon, the more it begins to feel less like a distant object and more like a quiet companion that has always been there. Every night it rises, every month it changes shape, every year it follows the same slow path across the sky. Civilizations have come and gone beneath it, languages have changed, borders have moved, but the moon has stayed almost exactly the same. That kind of consistency makes it feel permanent, as if it belongs to the background of existence itself. And yet, the deeper we look, the more we realize that even something so familiar can still hold questions we have not finished answering. Scientists often say that the moon is like a time capsule from the early solar system. On Earth, Wind, water, and geological activity erase the past again and again. Mountains rise and fall, oceans shift, and the surface is constantly renewed. The moon does not work that way. Without air or flowing water, its surface keeps the marks of ancient events. A crater formed billions of years ago can still be there, almost unchanged. When researchers study those craters, they are looking at history that no longer exists anywhere else. By counting the number of craters in different regions, scientists can estimate how old those areas are. The more craters, the older the surface. Using this method, they discovered that some parts of the moon are incredibly ancient, older than most rocks on Earth. These regions formed during a time when the solar system was still young and full of collisions. Studying them helps scientists understand what our own planet might have looked like long ago, before its surface was reshaped by oceans and continents. The moon also helps scientists learn about the future. Because it changes so slowly, it shows what a world can look like after billions of years without active geology. The moon has almost no volcanoes now, no shifting plates, no weather to reshape the land. It is quiet, stable, and very old. By studying it, researchers can see what might happen to other planets over long periods of time. Even Earth will not stay active forever. One day, far in the future, it may become more like the moon than it is today. There is something calming about that idea. The moon reminds us that time moves on a scale much larger than human life. Problems that feel important now will not matter in 1,000 years. Even mountains will change, oceans will move, and continents will drift. But the moon will probably still be there, circling the planet slowly, just as it has for billions of years. When you think about that, it becomes easier to relax, because you realize how small a single moment really is. At the same time, the moon is not completely separate from us. It continues to affect Earth every day. The tides rise and fall, the planet's rotation slows a tiny bit, and the moon moves slightly farther away each year. These changes are so small that we never notice them, but they never stop happening. The Earth-Moon system is still evolving, still moving, still changing in ways that are almost too slow to see. In the future, humans may become much more familiar with the moon than we are now. If new missions succeed, astronauts could spend weeks or months there instead of days. Bases might be built near the poles, where sunlight and ice make long stays possible. Robots may explore the far side in detail, sending back images of places no one has ever seen directly. Over time, the moon could become a place where people work, study, and travel regularly, instead of something we only look at from a distance. Even if that happens, the moon will probably never lose its sense of mystery completely. Part of that mystery comes from how it looks in the night sky. When you see it from Earth, it feels close enough to touch, but you know it is far away. It shines brightly, but the surface itself is dark. It moves slowly, but it never stops. These small contradictions make the moon feel different from anything else we see every day. Another part of the mystery comes from how long the moon has been part of human imagination. Long before science explained what it was, people told stories about it. They saw faces in its shadows, animals in its patterns, and meaning in its phases. Even now, when we understand the physics behind it, the feeling has not completely disappeared. The moon still feels like something more than just rock and dust, not because it is magical, but because it has been part of our thoughts for so long. Astronauts often said that seeing Earth from the moon changed the way they looked at everything. From that distance, the planet appears small and bright, floating alone in darkness. There are no borders, no cities, no signs of conflict, just clouds and oceans and land. Many of them said that moment made them realize how connected everything really is. The moon gave them a new perspective on Earth, and in a way, it can do the same for anyone who takes the time to think about it. When you look at the moon, you are looking at something that has been part of Earth's story since the beginning. It formed from the same material, moved through the same space, and helped shape the planet into what it is today. Without the moon, the tides would be different, the seasons might be unstable, and life might not have developed the same way. It is not just a neighbor. It is part of the reason our world became what it is. As we move closer to the end of this quiet journey, the moon feels less like a mystery to solve and more like something to understand slowly. Not everything about it needs to be surprising. Sometimes the most interesting things are the ones that have always been there, waiting to be noticed. The moon does not change quickly, and it does not try to get attention. It simply stays in the sky, night after night, exactly where it has always been. And maybe that is why it feels so calming to watch it. In a world where everything moves fast and nothing stays the same for long, the moon is a reminder that some things can remain steady for billions of years. As we continue drifting toward the final part of the story, the moon becomes less about secrets and more about perspective, about how something distant can make us see our own world differently, and how something silent can make us feel a little more at peace just by being there. As the story of the moon slowly comes together, it becomes clear that its greatest secret may not be something hidden beneath the surface, but the way it quietly changes how we see everything else. The moon has always been there, steady and predictable, yet the more we learn about it, the more it reminds us that even the most familiar things can have deeper histories than we first imagine. It formed from violence, shaped the oceans, stabilized the planet, and watched life grow on Earth without ever saying a word. That silent presence is part of what makes the moon feel so different from anything else in the sky. When people talk about space, they often think of distant planets, strange galaxies, or places so far away that they feel unreal. But the moon is not like that. It is close enough to see every night, close enough that humans have stood on it, and yet far enough that most of it is still untouched. That balance makes it unique. It is both known and unknown at the same time, both ordinary and mysterious. And because of that, the moon has always been a place where science and imagination meet. For thousands of years, people watched the moon without knowing what it really was. They built calendars around it, wrote stories about it, and used it to measure time. They saw patterns in its surface and gave them meaning. Later, telescopes revealed that those patterns were mountains and craters. Spacecraft showed that the surface was covered in dust. Astronauts proved that it was a real world, solid under their feet. Each step made the moon less mysterious in one way, but more interesting in another. Even now, after all the missions and all the research, the moon is not completely understood. Scientists still study its interior, still measure its motion, still examine rocks that were brought back decades ago. New instruments can see details that were impossible to detect before. New missions are planned to visit places that were never explored. Every time we look again, we notice something we missed before. Not because the moon changed, but because our understanding did. There is something comforting about that. It means the world is not as simple as it sometimes feels. There are always more layers, more history, more connections than we notice at first. The moon reminds us of that every time it rises. It looks the same, but it carries billions of years of story in its surface, a record of time that stretches far beyond human memory. The connection between Earth and the moon is also a reminder that nothing exists completely alone. Our planet and its satellite form together, change together, and still affect each other every day. The tides move because of the moon. The length of the day changes because of the moon. Even the stability of the seasons depends on it. These are quiet influences, but they never stop. Every ocean wave, every slow shift of the planet, every tiny change in motion is part of that long relationship. When astronauts saw Earth from the moon, they often said the same thing in different ways. They said the planet looked small, bright, and peaceful. From that distance, it was impossible to see the things that seem so important from the ground. There were no borders, no noise, no signs of conflict, just a glowing sphere floating in darkness. That view made them realize how connected everything is and how fragile the world can be. The moon gave them a perspective they could not have found anywhere else. In the future, humans will probably return to the moon many times. New missions are already being prepared, and the technology is far better than it was during the first landings. The next explorers may stay longer, travel farther, and learn more than ever before. They may build stations, study the poles, and explore the far side in ways that were impossible before. The moon may become a place people visit regularly, not just once in history. Even if that happens, the moon will probably never feel completely ordinary. Part of its power comes from how it looks in the sky. When you see it at night, it does not feel like a place full of equipment and experiments. It feels quiet, distant, and timeless. It feels like something that has always been there, something that will still be there long after everything else has changed. That feeling is not because the moon is hiding something secret. It is because it moves on a scale much larger than human life. It has been circling Earth for billions of years, and it will continue long after we are gone. When you think about that, it becomes easier to relax. The things that seem urgent right now are only small moments in a much longer story. The moon has seen all of it before, and it will see much more after. Sometimes the most peaceful thought is not that there are hidden mysteries waiting to be discovered, but that the universe is bigger and older than we can fully understand. The moon is a reminder of that every night. It shines quietly, not trying to explain anything, not trying to change, just following the same path it has always followed. As we move toward the end of this journey, the moon no longer feels like a puzzle to solve. It feels more like a companion, something that has always been part of the background of life on Earth. We look at it without thinking most of the time, but when we slow down and really notice it, we remember how unusual it really is. And in that quiet realization, the moon stops being just a light in the sky and becomes something much older, much steadier, and much calmer than anything we usually think about. By the time you reach this point in the story, the moon starts to feel less like an object and more like a presence. Not in a mysterious or supernatural way, but in the sense that it has always been there, always part of the background of life on Earth. Every generation has looked at the same moon. People thousands of years ago saw the same shapes, the same phases, the same slow movement across the sky. Empires rose and disappeared under its light, and the moon never changed its pace. That kind of consistency is rare, and it gives the moon a feeling of permanence that almost nothing else has. When you think about how long the moon has been circling Earth, it becomes easier to understand why it feels so calm. It formed billions of years ago, during a time when the solar system was still young and violent. Planets were colliding, surfaces were melting, and nothing was stable yet. Out of that chaos came the Earth and the moon, locked together in a slow orbit that has continued ever since. Over time, everything cooled, settled, and became quieter, but the motion never stopped. Even now, the moon is still drifting slowly away, just a few centimeters every year, moving so gradually that no one can notice it without careful measurements. This slow movement is one of the reasons the moon feels timeless. Human life moves quickly. Days pass, years pass, and everything changes faster than we expect. The moon moves on a different scale. Its changes take thousands, millions, even billions of years. When you look at it, you are looking at something that existed long before anyone was here to see it, and something that will still be there long after we are gone. That idea can feel strange at first, but it can also feel peaceful. because it reminds you that not everything has to happen quickly. The moon also reminds us how connected everything in space really is. Earth and the moon are not separate stories. They form together, and they still affect each other every day. The tides rise because of the moon. The length of the day changes because of the moon. The stability of the planet depends partly on the moon. These things happen quietly, without anyone noticing, but they never stop. Even now, the Earth and the moon are slowly changing each other, just as they always have. When astronauts stood on the moon and looked back at Earth, they saw that connection in a way no one else ever had before. From the surface of the moon, Earth looks bright and alive, full of color and motion. Clouds swirl across the oceans, sunlight reflects off the water, and the whole planet seems to glow against the darkness of space. Many astronauts said that moment stayed with them more than anything else. The moon was silent and still, but Earth looked active and fragile, like something that needed to be protected. That feeling changed the way people thought about space exploration. Before the moon landings, the goal had been to prove what humans could do. Afterward, the goal began to feel different. Seeing Earth from far away made it clear how small it really is. The moon, which once seemed distant, became a place that helped us understand our own planet better. In that way, the moon did not just teach us about space, it taught us about ourselves. Even now, the moon continues to give us perspective. When you see it at night, it looks close enough to touch, but you know it is far away. It looks bright, but its surface is actually dark. It looks quiet, but it is always moving. These small contradictions make the moon feel different from anything else we see. It is familiar, yet never completely ordinary. In the coming years, humans will probably return to the moon again. New missions are being prepared, new landing sites are being chosen, and new technology is being built to survive the harsh environment. This time, the goal is not just to visit once, but to explore more carefully and stay longer. The poles, the far side, and the deep craters that never see sunlight may finally be studied up close. Each new step will answer some questions, but it will also create new ones, just like before. And even as science learns more, the moon will probably keep its quiet feeling of mystery. Not because something is hidden there, but because it exists on a scale that humans are not used to thinking about. It moves slowly, changes slowly, and keeps the marks of its past for billions of years. When you compare that to the speed of everyday life, the moon feels almost still, even though it is always in motion. That may be why people have always found it calming to look at the moon. It does not rush. It does not react. It does not demand attention. It simply follows the same path, night after night, just as it always has. In a world where everything else changes, the moon feels steady. As we get closer to the end of this quiet journey, the secrets of the moon begin to feel less like mysteries to solve, and more like reminders of how big the universe really is. The moon shows us that even the closest world can take a lifetime to understand, and even then, there will always be more to learn. And maybe that is what makes it so peaceful to watch. You do not have to know everything about it. You only have to look up and see that it is still there, exactly where it has always been. As the journey through these moon secrets begins to slow down, the feeling that remains is not one of mystery, but of quiet understanding. The moon does not need to hide anything to feel fascinating. It has been part of Earth's story for so long that its presence feels natural, almost expected. And yet the deeper you think about it, the more unusual it becomes. A world formed from a collision, drifting slowly through space, shaping the tides, steadying the planet, and lighting the night for billions of years. It is something we see all the time, but rarely stop to truly notice. One of the reasons the moon feels so calm to look at is because it moves in a way that never seems rushed. Night after night it rises, crosses the sky, and disappears again, always following the same rhythm. The phases change slowly, taking almost a full month to complete a cycle. Nothing about it feels sudden. Nothing feels unpredictable. Even though the moon is constantly moving through space at incredible speed, from our point of view, it seems peaceful and steady, like it has all the time in the universe. That slow rhythm has shaped human life more than we often realize. Long before clocks, people used the moon to measure time. Months were based on its phases. Festivals were planned around full moons. Travelers used its light to guide them at night. The moon became part of how people understood the world, not because they knew exactly what it was, but because they could rely on it to return again and again without fail. There is something comforting about that kind of predictability. In a world where things change quickly, the moon reminds us that some patterns stay the same. It rises when it is supposed to rise. It fades when it is supposed to fade. It never rushes, never stops, never forgets its path. When you watch it long enough, it feels less like an object and more like a rhythm, something steady in the background of everything else. At the same time, the moon carries the memory of a past much older than human history. The craters on its surface are marks left by impacts that happened billions of years ago. The dark plains were formed by ancient volcanic flows that stopped long before life appeared on Earth. The dust that covers the ground has been sitting there for ages, untouched by wind or rain. When astronauts walked there, their footprints became part of that history, and they will stay there for longer than anyone can imagine. That idea can feel strange at first, but it can also feel peaceful. It means the universe does not hurry. Things can last for millions of years without changing. The moon shows us what time looks like on a scale much larger than our own lives. When you think about that, the small worries of the day begin to feel less important. The moon has seen oceans form, continents move, and species appear and disappear. Whatever is happening right now is only a tiny moment compared to that. In the future, humans will probably become more familiar with the moon than ever before. New missions will land in places we have never seen up close. Bases may be built near the poles, where sunlight and ice make long stays possible. Robots will explore craters that have never been touched by light. Astronauts may spend months there, learning how to live in a world that feels quiet and empty compared to Earth. Even when that happens, the moon will probably never lose its calm feeling. Standing on its surface, astronauts often said the same thing in different ways. They said the silence was deeper than anything they had known. Without air, there was no wind, no echo, no background noise at all. Every movement felt slow, every step felt light, and the sky stayed black even in daylight. It was not frightening, but it was different enough to make them realize how alive Earth really is. Looking back at Earth from the moon made many astronauts feel connected to the planet in a new way. From that distance, the world looks small and bright, floating alone in the darkness. There are no borders, no cities, no signs of conflict, just clouds and oceans and land. That view reminded them that everything on Earth is part of the same place, the same small world traveling through space together. The moon gives that kind of perspective, even to people who never leave the ground. When you look at it at night, you are looking at something that has always been part of our planet's story. It helped shape the tides, helped steady the seasons, and may have helped life grow in the first place. Without the moon, Earth would still exist, but it might feel very different. And maybe that is the quiet secret of the moon. Not that it is hiding something, but that it has always been connected to us in ways we do not think about very often. It has been there since the beginning, moving slowly, keeping the same rhythm, watching the planet change while it stays almost the same. As we move toward the final part of this journey, the moon no longer feels like a mystery to solve. It feels like something steady, something constant, something that reminds us that the universe is bigger and older than we usually imagine. And sometimes, the most relaxing thought is simply that the moon will still be there tonight, just as it was last night, and just as it will be tomorrow. By now, the story of the moon feels less like a collection of facts and more like a slow walk through something that has always been there, quietly shaping the world without asking for attention. The moon does not rush, it does not change quickly, and it does not try to explain itself. It simply follows the same path it has followed for billions of years, circling the Earth in a rhythm so steady that entire civilizations have lived and disappeared under its light, without ever seeing it do anything unexpected. And maybe that is the most relaxing secret of all. The moon is not mysterious because it hides something. It feels mysterious because it moves on a timescale so much larger than our own. When you look at the moon at night, it is easy to forget how much history is written across its surface. Every crater marks an impact from long ago. Every dark plain shows where molten rock once spread across the ground. Every layer of dust has been resting there for ages, untouched by wind or rain. The moon keeps its past the way Earth cannot. Our planet is always changing, always moving, always reshaping itself. The moon stays still enough to remember. That stillness is part of what makes it feel calm. In a world where everything moves quickly, the moon reminds us that not everything has to. It takes almost a month to go through its phases. It takes millions of years for its orbit to change in a way we can measure. It takes billions of years for its surface to look different. When you think about time like that, the worries of a single day begin to feel very small. The connection between Earth and the moon makes that feeling even stronger. The two worlds form together, and they have never really been separate. The tides rise because of the moon. The length of the day changes because of the moon. The stability of the seasons depends partly on the moon. Even though we rarely think about it, the moon is always affecting the planet in quiet ways. Every ocean wave, every slow movement of the Earth, every tiny shift in time carries a small reminder that the moon is still there, doing what it has always done. When astronauts stood on the lunar surface, they said the silence was unlike anything they had ever known. No air, no wind, no sound at all except what came through their suits. The ground was grey and still. The sky was black even in daylight, and Earth hung in the distance like a bright blue light. Many of them said that moment changed how they thought about everything. From the moon, the world looked peaceful and fragile at the same time, like something that needed to be protected. That view may be one of the most important things the moon has given us. Not a secret, not a discovery, but a different perspective. When you see Earth from far away, it becomes clear how small it really is compared to the darkness around it. The moon helped us see our own planet in a way we never could before. It showed us that the place we live is only one small part of a much larger story. And that story is still continuing. New missions are being planned, new spacecraft are being built, and humans will almost certainly walk on the moon again. This time, the goal is not only to visit, but to stay longer, to explore more carefully, and to learn what we missed before. The poles, the far side, and the deep craters that never see sunlight may finally be studied up close. Each new mission will answer questions, but it will also remind us how much there is left to understand. Even if we explore every part of the moon, it will probably never lose its calm feeling. It will still rise at night, just as it always has. It will still change shape slowly, just as it always has. It will still move across the sky in the same steady rhythm that people have watched for thousands of years. Technology may change, knowledge may grow, but the moon will continue doing what it has always done. Sometimes the most peaceful thought is not about discovering something new, but about realizing that some things do not need to change at all. The moon does not need to surprise us to be interesting. It does not need to hide secrets to be fascinating. It only needs to keep moving the way it always has, reminding us that the universe is older, larger, and calmer than we usually remember. So tonight, when the sky grows dark and the moon appears again, it will be the same moon that ancient people watched, the same moon the astronauts walked on, the same moon that has been circling Earth since the beginning. It will not hurry. It will not stop. It will simply continue its slow, silent path through space. And maybe that is why it is so easy to fall asleep while thinking about it. Because the moon has all the time in the universe, and for a little while, listening to its story, it feels like we do too.